The bell above the door of the daily grind jingled merrily, but Julian barely heard it over the roar of voices. He stepped inside, a wave of warmth washing over him, not just from the heating, but from the sheer number of people crammed into the cozy space. It was a symphony of sounds, the hiss and gurgle of the espresso machine, the clatter of ceramic mugs, and the constant hum of conversation, punctuated by bursts of laughter. And oh, the smell! A rich, intoxicating perfume of dark roasted coffee beans, warm milk, and something sweet, like cinnamon or vanilla, hung heavy in the air, wrapping around him like a comforting blanket. Julian clutched his worn messenger bag a little tighter, feeling a familiar mix of anticipation and dread. He loved the vibrant energy of the daily grind, but he also cherished his quiet corner, his little island of calm in the bustling café. Today, however, finding that island looked like an impossible quest. His eyes scanned the room, darting from one packed table to another. Every single chair seemed to be occupied. A young couple shared a pastry, their heads bent close together. A student, buried behind a towering stack of books, occasionally took a sip from a giant mug. A group of friends jest-led loudly, their hands waving as they animatedly told stories. There was no space. Not a single, solitary spot. A sigh escaped Julian's lips, almost lost in the café's lively din. He was about to turn and leave, to concede defeat and find a quieter, less inspiring place, when something caught his eye. Tucked away in a corner, near a large window that looked out onto the rain-slicked street, was a small, round table. It was meant for two, perhaps three at a squeeze, and, miracle of miracles, it was empty. One chair was neatly pushed in, and the other was angled slightly, as if someone had just left or was about to arrive. A spark of hope ignited in Julian's chest. This was it, his perfect spot, just waiting for him. It wasn't his usual corner, but it offered a good view of the street and a little distance from the loudest conversations. He pictured himself there, settling in with a good book, sipping a perfectly brewed latte, and letting the café's energy simply wash over him without demanding his participation. The thought alone made him feel a little lighter. With a renewed sense of purpose, Julian began to navigate the crowded aisles, mumbling polite, "Excuse me," as he wove his way between chairs and standing patrons. He kept his eyes fixed on his prize, that small, unassuming table, a beacon in the sea of people. He imagined the satisfying thud of his bag hitting the floor beside the chair, the gentle warmth of the ceramic mug in his hands. It was going to be perfect. Almost there, he thought, just a few more steps. The aroma of fresh coffee seemed to intensify with every stride, pulling him closer, promising a delicious reward for his perseverance. Julian, fueled by the promise of that vacant table, carefully threaded his way through the bustling café. Each step was deliberate, a silent prayer that no one else would notice his little oasis before he reached it. He was almost there, close enough to feel the cool air from the window on his cheek, when a thought, sharp and insistent, pricked his excitement. Coffee. He couldn't just claim the table and then abandon it to stand in line at the counter. That would be an open invitation for someone else to swoop in. He glanced at the counter, where a line snaked almost to the door. It moved at a steady pace, but it was still a commitment. He looked back at the table, now tantalizingly close, just beyond a cluster of standing patrons. It seemed to shimmer with an almost magical glow. He could almost feel the smooth wood beneath his fingertips. But the coffee. A quiet moment at a table felt incomplete without the warm, aromatic comfort of his usual latte. A small debate waged within him. Table first, then coffee? Or coffee first, then risk losing the table? The cafe was so packed, the chances of finding another seat, if this one vanished, were practically zero. But going to the counter first felt like the safer bet. He could order his drink, keep an eye on the table from a distance, and then, armed with his steaming mug, make his final approach. It was a strategy, a plan, a slightly risky one, perhaps, but a plan nonetheless. With a slight change in trajectory, Julian veered towards the back of the coffee line, joining the patient queue. His eyes, however, remained glued to that corner table. He watched it with the intensity of a hawk, ready to pounce if anyone even looked in its direction. A woman with a bright red scarf laughed loudly near it, but she was facing away. A man in a business suit walked past, phone pressed to his ear, oblivious. Good. So far, so good. The line shuffled forward. Julian took a moment to appreciate the scene around him. The baristas, a blur of motion behind the counter, moved with practiced efficiency, grinding beans, steaming milk, and pouring artful designs into cups. The air here was even richer with coffee, a deep, comforting aroma that promised warmth and wakefulness. He could hear snippets of conversation, deadline, weekend plans, did you hear about? It was a tapestry of everyday life, woven with caffeine and human connection. When it was finally his turn, Julian quickly ordered as usual, a medium latte with an extra shot. The barista, a young woman with a friendly smile and quick hands, nodded and started preparing his drink. While he waited, Julian's gaze drifted back to the table. It was still empty. A small wave of relief washed over him. His strategy was paying off. He could almost taste the creamy coffee, feel the weight of the mug in his hand as he settled into his chair. He watched the barista expertly steam the milk, creating a perfect foam. The rich, dark espresso swirled into the cup, followed by the white, frothy milk, forming a delicate pattern. It was a work of art, and it was almost his. He reached for his wallet, ready to pay, his mind already picturing the moment he would finally sit down. The table was just a few feet away now, beckoning him. He just needed to pay, grab his drink, and then, finally, that quiet moment of coffee-fueled bliss would be his. His fingers brushed against the cool plastic of his card. This was it. With his warm latte finally in hand, Julian felt a surge of triumph. The cup was just the right weight, the ceramic smooth against his fingers, and the creamy coffee scent rose to meet him, promising comfort. He paid, grabbed a stirrer, and turned, ready to claim his prize. His eyes immediately darted to the corner table. It was still there, still empty, still beckoning. A smile touched his lips. His plan, risky as it felt, had worked. He began his final approach, weaving past a couple debating pastries and sidestepping a child who darted out from behind a pillar. The table grew larger in his vision, the two chairs waiting. He imagined sliding into the one closest to the window, placing his coffee down, and finally, truly relaxing. The café's din, which had felt like a challenge earlier, now seemed like a pleasant background hum. He was almost there. Just a few more steps. Then it happened. From his left, a figure moved with an almost casual grace. Julian saw him only in his peripheral vision at first, a blur of motion. Before Julian could even fully register what was happening, this newcomer, a man with tousled brown hair and a confident stride, reached the corner table. Julian's heart gave a little lurch. No, he thought, not now. Not after all that careful planning. But the man didn't just walk past. He didn't even hesitate. With an air of absolute certainty, he slid into the chair directly across from the one Julian had mentally claimed. It was the other chair at the two-person table, the one that had been angled slightly, as if inviting someone. Julian froze, his latte held mid-air, a steaming testament to his thwarted hopes. The man settled in, making himself perfectly at home. He wasn't just sitting, he was occupying the space. Then, with a flourish that Julian found both infuriating and strangely impressive, he reached into a canvas bag, slung over his shoulder, and pulled out a thick, leather-bound book. He placed it squarely on the tabletop, right between the two chairs, as if staking an undeniable claim. He even gave the book a little pat, a gesture that seemed to say, "This is mine now, and this table, by extension, is also mine." Julian stared, dumbfounded. The steam from his latte seemed to mock him, rising into the air like a question mark. He felt a blush creep up his neck, a mix of embarrassment and indignation. This wasn't just a casual taking of a seat. It was a bold, almost theatrical appropriation. The man hadn't even looked around, hadn't scanned the room for other options. He had simply arrived, seen the table, and taken it as if it were reserved especially for him. The man, oblivious to Julian's simmering frustration, finally looked up. His eyes, a startling shade of green, met Julian's. A slow, easy grin spread across his face, a smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes and seemed to hold a hint of mischief. He didn't look apologetic. He looked pleased. Pleased with himself, pleased with the table, pleased with the world. Julian stood there, rooted to the spot, his latte growing cooler by the second. The cafe's noise, which had moments ago been a friendly hum, now felt like a cacophony, highlighting his awkward, unseated presence. He had planned, he had waited, he had strategized, and in a single, confident move, this stranger had undone it all. The book on the table, a silent sentinel, seemed to mock his meticulous efforts. He felt a sudden, childish urge to stomp his foot. This was his table, or at least it was supposed to be. Julian stood, his latte still held aloft, the steam a visible testament to his rapidly cooling composure. The man across the table, whose green eyes still twinkled with that infuriatingly charming grin, seemed perfectly at ease, as if finding a random table in a packed cafe and immediately claiming it was an everyday occurrence. Julian's mind raced, trying to formulate a polite, yet firm, way to explain the situation. He wasn't usually one for confrontation, especially not over a cafe seat, but this felt different. This felt like a challenge to his very right to a quiet coffee. He took a breath, the scent of his latte momentarily grounding him. "Excuse me," Julian began, his voice a little more flustered than he intended, a slight tremor betraying his annoyance. I was actually just about to sit here." He gestured vaguely at the empty chair next to him, then back towards the counter, implying his recent journey. He tried to project an air of polite ownership, but he suspected he just looked a bit like a startled pigeon. The man's grin didn't falter. If anything, it widened slightly, revealing a flash of white teeth. His eyes, full of a playful mischief, seemed to dance. He leaned back in the chair, making himself even more comfortable, and picked up the leather-bound book, running a thumb over its spine. He didn't seem to have any intention of moving. "Oh," the man replied, his voice a smooth, low rumble that was surprisingly pleasant, despite the situation. "Were you now?" He didn't sound apologetic. He sounded intrigued. "Funny, I didn't see any reserve sign. Or perhaps a small, carefully placed gnome guarding the perimeter." He gestured around the table with his free hand, his eyes still fixed on Julian, a challenge in their depths. Julian felt his cheeks flush even hotter. "A gnome? Really?" He tightened his grip on his latte mug. "No, of course not," he retorted, trying to keep his voice even. "But I was just at the counter getting my coffee, and I was making my way over. This was the only empty table in the whole place." He felt a little like a child explaining why a toy was rightfully theirs, and he hated it. The man chuckled, a soft, warm sound that seemed to cut through the cafe's general hubbub. He put the book down again, this time open to a random page. "Ah, a strategic retreat for supplies," he mused, as if Julian had just recounted a daring military maneuver. "A bold move, my friend. But in the wild jungle of the daily grind, the early bird, or rather, the early sitter, catches the worm, wouldn't you agree?" He raised an eyebrow, a clear invitation for Julian to play along with his game. Julian blinked. "Early sitter?" He looked around again, confirming the cafe was still packed, a vibrant tapestry of noise and motion. He couldn't argue with the early sitter logic, even if he found it utterly infuriating in this particular context. He had been so careful, so strategic, and yet here he was, standing over a table that was now effectively half-claimed by a stranger with a cheeky grin. "Well," Julian managed, a hint of exasperation creeping into his tone, "I suppose that depends on whether the early sitter considers the about-to-sitter to have prior claim." He felt a small, reluctant smile twitch at the corner of his own lips. This man was truly something else. His fluster was slowly giving way to a strange sense of amusement. The man's playful glint seemed to deepen, his grin becoming almost infectious. "A fascinating philosophical dilemma," the man said, leaning forward slightly, his green eyes sparkling. Perhaps a test of wills, a battle of wits, right here in the heart of our beloved daily grind. He gestured grandly at the table between them, as if it were a grand chessboard. Julian, despite himself, felt a bubble of laughter begin to rise within him. This was not how he'd imagined his quiet coffee moment. Not at all. Julian, still clutching his latte, felt the tension in his shoulders ease just a fraction. The man's playful challenge, delivered with that disarming grin, had managed to chip away at Julian's initial annoyance. A battle of wits, indeed. He found himself almost smiling back, despite the ridiculousness of the situation. This wasn't the quiet, solitary coffee he'd planned, but it was certainly turning into something unexpected. A battle of wits, you say? Julian repeated, a genuine, if still slightly exasperated, laugh escaping him. Over a cafe table? Isn't that a bit much? He gestured around the packed room, the sheer number of people a silent argument in his favor. Look around. There's nowhere else. You can't possibly expect me to just stand here. He tried to sound firm, but the corner of his mouth betrayed him with a slight upward curve. The man, whose name Julian still didn't know, leaned back again, his gaze sweeping over the crowded cafe, as if confirming Julian's point. He then met Julian's eyes once more, his own still sparkling. Precisely, he declared, as if Julian had just made his own argument for him. Nowhere else. And since my posterior has already made itself quite comfortable in this particular chair, and seeing as your delicious-looking latte appears to be cooling rapidly in your hand, I propose a truce. He paused for dramatic effect, letting the cafe's lively hum fill the silence. A temporary alliance, if you will. The daily grind is a battlefield, Julian. He stopped, a small frown creasing his brow. My apologies, I don't believe we've been properly introduced. Oliver. He extended a hand across the table, his grin softening into something genuinely friendly. Oliver Reed. Julian, caught off guard by the sudden introduction and the use of his name. How did he know it? Instinctively shifted his latte to his other hand and shook Oliver's. His hand was warm and firm. Julian, he managed a little breathlessly. Julian Hayes. Julian, Oliver repeated, his voice warm. A pleasure. Now, as I was saying, the daily grind is a battlefield. And on battlefields, resources are scarce. This table, Julian, is prime real estate. And seeing as it comfortably seats two, and given the current housing crisis in this establishment, it seems almost rude not to share. Wouldn't you agree? Oliver gestured to the empty chair opposite him, the one Julian had been eyeing moments before. He wasn't moving. He wasn't offering to vacate. He was, with an astonishing amount of charm and wit, inviting Julian to join him. It was bold, audacious, and utterly disarming. Julian stared at the chair, then at Oliver. The man hadn't just taken his seat. He had commandeered the entire table, and was now presenting the remaining half as a generous offering. The audacity of it was truly something. But what was he supposed to do? Turn around and leave? Go searching for another non-existent seat? His latte was indeed getting cooler, and his arm started to ache from holding it. A genuine laugh finally bubbled up from Julian, a real, unforced sound that cut through the cafe's noise. It started as a chuckle, then grew into a full-blown laugh that made a few heads turn. Oliver's grin widened even further, clearly pleased with his effect. So, Julian said, still laughing a little, your solution to having taken my table is for me to share it with you. He shook his head, a genuine smile now gracing his face. That's certainly a unique interpretation of sharing. Oliver shrugged, his eyes twinkling. Necessity, Julian, is the mother of invention. And in a cafe this packed, sharing becomes not just a courtesy, but a strategic imperative. Unless, of course, you'd prefer to stand. He raised an eyebrow, a clear challenge. The empty chair, now seeming to mock Julian's indecision, waited. Julian's laughter, a genuine burst of mirth, echoed faintly in the lively cafe. Oliver's audacious proposal, delivered with such an infectious grin, had completely disarmed him. The initial annoyance, the The frustration of a well-laid plan gone awry had dissolved into sheer amusement. He found himself shaking his head, a wry smile playing on his lips as he looked at Oliver, who still sat there, expectant and utterly unrepentant. "You really are something else, Oliver Reed," Julian said, his voice still tinged with residual laughter. He glanced around the cafe once more, just to confirm what he already knew. Every table was still occupied. Every stool at the window counter was taken. Even the small standing room-only ledge near the pastry display had a few people huddled around it. Oliver was right. There truly were no other seats. The realization settled over Julian with a sense of finality. He could stand there, awkwardly holding his cooling latte, feeling foolish and stubborn, or he could embrace the unexpected. And honestly, Oliver's sheer nerve, combined with his quick wit, was proving to be far more entertaining than his planned quiet reading session. It was an unconventional start to his coffee break, to say the least. "So," Oliver prompted, his green eyes still sparkling with that playful glint, "are you going to join me in this strategic imperative, or are you going to stand there and let your excellent latte get cold?" He gestured again to the empty chair, a silent invitation that was impossible to ignore. Julian sighed, a sound of mock resignation, but his smile remained. All right, you win," he conceded, finally making his way to the empty chair. He carefully placed his messenger bag on the floor beside it, then slid into the seat. The wood felt solid beneath him, a welcome relief after standing. He placed his latte on the table, the ceramic making a soft clink as it met the polished surface. The warmth from the mug spread through his fingers, a small comfort in this surprising turn of events. "Don't look so defeated, Julian," Oliver chuckled, watching him. "Consider it a fortunate twist of fate. Who knows what fascinating conversations might arise from this impromptu, shared space." He picked up his leather-bound book again, but didn't open it. His attention was fully on Julian. Julian took a sip of his latte. It was still warm, thankfully. "I'm not defeated," he corrected, a twinkle in his own eye now. "Just unexpectedly rerouted. And I'm not entirely sure fascinating conversations were on my agenda today. My agenda usually involves quiet contemplation and avoiding unexpected human interaction." Oliver let out a hearty laugh, a sound that drew a few more glances their way. "Ah, a fellow introvert then," he teased. "Excellent. That makes this all the more deliciously inconvenient for you, doesn't it?" Julian couldn't help but laugh again. "Inconvenient, yes," he admitted, "but also surprisingly amusing." He leaned back in his chair, finally able to relax. The rich scent of coffee and the lively buzz of the cafe, which had felt overwhelming before, now simply added to the unique atmosphere of this unexpected encounter. He looked at Oliver, who was still grinning, and realized that perhaps, just perhaps, his quiet coffee break might actually be better with a little bit of unexpected company. The playful tension was still there, a subtle current beneath their words, but it was now laced with a genuine sense of curiosity. With a comfortable sigh, Julian finally settled into the chair, his latte now resting safely on the small table. The initial awkwardness of their encounter began to fade, replaced by a strange sense of camaraderie. Oliver, still radiating an easy confidence, leaned forward slightly, his green eyes glinting. "So, Julian Hayes," Oliver began, a playful challenge in his tone, "since our paths have so unexpectedly collided, tell me, what brings a man of quiet contemplation to the bustling heart of the daily grind on a day like this? Escaping the demands of the outside world, perhaps." He gestured vaguely towards the window, where the rain still pattered gently against the glass. Julian took another sip of his latte, savoring its warmth. "Something like that," he admitted with a wry smile, "though I usually manage to find a less populated corner. My mission was simply a good coffee and a bit of peace to read." He nodded towards Oliver's leather-bound book, "which, I assume, was also your mission before you became the intrepid table claimer." Oliver chuckled, picking up his book and flipping it open, though he didn't start reading. "Precisely. Though my methods, as you've observed, are a touch more direct. Why waste time searching when destiny clearly points to the one available seat?" He winked, and Julian couldn't help but laugh again. Their conversation flowed easily from there, a natural rhythm developing between Oliver's bold pronouncements and Julian's more understated wit. They started by making observations about the cafe itself. "Look at that woman," Julian murmured, nodding subtly towards a woman at a nearby table who was attempting to balance 3 pastries on a single saucer. "She's either incredibly optimistic or dangerously hungry." Oliver followed his gaze and let out a soft laugh. "Or perhaps she's training for a circus act. The great pastry pyramid of the daily grind," he quipped, earning another chuckle from Julian. They commented on the intense focus of the student buried in textbooks, wondering aloud if a single coffee could truly fuel such dedication. They speculated about the hurried conversations of the business types, imagining dramatic corporate espionage behind every whispered phone call. The cafe, once a source of annoyance, became their shared stage for light-hearted commentary. "It's like a microcosm of the city, isn't it?" Oliver observed, taking a thoughtful sip of his own coffee, which Julian now noticed was a strong-looking Americano. Everyone with their own little world, their own mission, all buzzing around each other. "And you," Julian teased, "are the rogue element, disrupting the carefully planned routines of unsuspecting coffee lovers." Oliver pretended to be wounded. "Me? Never. I am merely a catalyst for unexpected adventure, a harbinger of shared tables and spontaneous wit." He paused, his eyes twinkling again. "Speaking of coffee, yours looks far too creamy and comforting. Mine, as you can see, is a stark, no-nonsense fuel. What's your poison?" "Latte, extra shot," Julian replied, feeling a genuine warmth spread through him that had nothing to do with the coffee. "It's my small indulgence." "What about your stark, no-nonsense fuel?" "Americano, black," Oliver confirmed. "Gets the job done. Though I admit, your latte smells rather divine. A cloud of milky goodness." He feigned a dramatic sniff, making Julian smile. They talked about their day, Julian briefly mentioning his work as a graphic designer, which often involved long hours and a need for creative bursts. Oliver revealed he was a freelance writer, currently wrestling with a particularly stubborn historical fiction piece, which explained the formidable book on the table. "So you steal tables and wrestle with words," Julian joked. "A man of many talents." Oliver grinned. "And you, Julian, design worlds with pixels and colors. Perhaps our unexpected meeting is a cosmic alignment, a creative cross-pollination waiting to happen." The playful tension that had initially marked their encounter had softened into a comfortable back and forth. The aroma of coffee and the cafe's lively chatter now felt like a natural backdrop to their burgeoning conversation. Julian found himself genuinely enjoying the company of this bold, witty stranger, realizing that his disrupted plans had led to something far more engaging than a solitary coffee. The rich scent of coffee, a constant presence, swirled around Julian as he found himself immersed in conversation with Oliver. What had started as a clash over a cafe seat had blossomed into a surprisingly engaging exchange. Julian, who usually preferred the quiet company of a book, realized he was genuinely enjoying Oliver's presence. The initial irritation had completely evaporated, replaced by a comfortable ease. Oliver was a natural conversationalist, his witty remarks and infectious enthusiasm keeping the dialogue lively. He had a knack for finding humor in everyday observations, and Julian found himself chuckling frequently. They moved from discussing the eccentricities of the cafe patrons to sharing anecdotes about their own lives. Julian found himself opening up more than he typically would with a stranger, spurred on by Oliver's genuine interest and quick responses. "You know," Julian mused, swirling his latte thoughtfully, "when I walked in here, I was ready to give up and just go home. Every seat was taken, and I was convinced I was destined for a coffee-less, miserable morning." He glanced at Oliver, a hint of his earlier annoyance returning in a fond, teasing way. "And then you came along and cemented my misery by stealing my only hope." Oliver feigned a look of deep offense, placing a hand over his heart. "Stealing? Julian, please. I'm merely occupied an ungenome-guarded, strategically important piece of real estate. A public service, if you ask me, ensuring that no good seed goes to waste. His green eyes sparkled with mirth. Besides, look at you now. Not miserable at all. In fact, dare I say, almost enjoying yourself. Julian laughed outright. All right, I'll give you that, he conceded. I am, surprisingly, enjoying myself. Which is a testament to your persuasive charm, I suppose. Or perhaps, Oliver leaned forward conspiratorially, a testament to the fact that, deep down, you're secretly thrilled by unexpected adventures. Your inner introvert yearns for a bit of playful chaos, and I, my friend, am merely its humble servant. Julian shook his head, still smiling. You're full of it, Oliver Reed. But he said it with warmth, not accusation. He found Oliver's bold, self-assured personality oddly refreshing. It was a stark contrast to his own more reserved nature, and yet they seemed to bounce off each other perfectly. The playful tension that had simmered at the start had transformed into a comfortable, almost flirtatious banter. They talked about music, discovering a shared love for obscure indie bands. They debated the merits of city life versus country living, Oliver championing the energy of the urban jungle, while Julian confessed a longing for more open spaces. Even when they disagreed, it was with a lightheartedness that made their differences entertaining rather than divisive. The cafe's lively atmosphere, once a potential distraction, now simply provided a vibrant backdrop to their conversation. The rich scent of coffee, once a promise of solitary comfort, now mingled with the warmth of shared laughter. Julian found himself forgetting his initial purpose, his book forgotten in his bag. The conversation with Oliver was far more captivating than any story he could have read. He realized how easily the words flowed between them, how natural it felt to simply talk and listen. Oliver didn't just wait for his turn to speak. He engaged, he reacted, he built upon Julian's thoughts with his own. It was a rare and pleasant surprise, this effortless connection with a complete stranger who, just a short while ago, had been the source of his exasperation. The initial tension had truly melted away, leaving behind only the easy rhythm of two people enjoying each other's unexpected company. The cafe's symphony of sounds, once a source of mild distraction, now felt like a cheerful accompaniment to Julian and Oliver's conversation. Their easy banter had drifted from indie bands to the quirks of their respective creative fields, Julian explaining the precise art of typography, while Oliver lamented the tyranny of plot holes. Julian felt completely at ease, a feeling he rarely experienced with new acquaintances. You know, Oliver said, taking a sip of his Americano, his eyes still holding that familiar, playful glint. I must admit, your face when you first saw me sitting here was absolutely priceless. He leaned back in his chair, a broad grin spreading across his face. Pure, unadulterated bewilderment, followed by a flicker of what I can only describe as existential dread. As if the very fabric of your cafe routine had been irrevocably torn. Julian felt a blush creep up his neck, but he couldn't help but laugh. It was true. His carefully constructed plan for a peaceful morning had indeed shattered the moment Oliver had so brazenly claimed the seat. He remembered the feeling of his latte growing cold in his hand, his mind scrambling for a polite but firm way to assert his claim. Existential dread? Julian repeated, feigning offense. Hardly. More like mild exasperation and an unforeseen, albeit charming, obstacle. He grinned back, unable to maintain the facade of indignation. Though I admit the gnome guarding the perimeter comment really threw me off. Oliver threw his head back and laughed, a rich, booming sound that drew the attention of a few nearby patrons. The gnome defense, a classic tactic, always effective against the unprepared. He looked at Julian, his eyes twinkling. You really looked like you were about to demand a duel at dawn, or at least a formal petition to the cafe management. Julian imagined himself doing just that, standing in front of the barista, waving his latte, and making a passionate, yet ultimately futile, argument about prior claim. The image was so absurd, so utterly unlike him, that a fresh wave of laughter bubbled up from deep within his chest. It started as a chuckle, then quickly escalated into a full-blown, unrestrained guffaw. He laughed so hard that his shoulders shook, and he had to put his latte down to avoid spilling it. Tears pricked at the corners of his eyes, and he pressed a hand to his mouth, trying to stifle the joyous sound, but it was no use. The sheer ridiculousness of the situation, coupled with Oliver's infectious amusement, had completely overwhelmed him. He hadn't laughed like this in ages, not a genuine, unburdened, laugh until your sides hurt kind of laugh. Oliver watched him, his own grin wide and appreciative. He didn't try to stop Julian, just let him ride the wave of mirth. The warmth in Oliver's gaze made Julian feel even more comfortable, even more open. It was a wonderful, freeing sensation. When Julian finally managed to compose himself, wiping a tear from his eye, he looked at Oliver, still beaming. "You," Julian managed, still breathless from laughter, "you are truly incorrigible." Oliver simply shrugged, a picture of charming innocence. Just a man trying to find a good seat for his book, Julian. And perhaps, along the way, provide a little unexpected entertainment. It's all part of the daily grind experience, wouldn't you say? He leaned back, a satisfied look on his face, as if his mission for the day was complete. Julian couldn't argue. He felt lighter, happier, and completely unburdened by his earlier quest for a solitary corner. The last echoes of Julian's hearty laughter faded, leaving him feeling lighter and more cheerful than he had in weeks. Oliver, still beaming, took another sip of his Americano, his green eyes sparkling with satisfaction. The playful tension that had defined their initial encounter was now completely gone, replaced by a comfortable, easy warmth. "You really did give me a fright, you know," Julian confessed, a lingering smile on his face as he looked across the table at Oliver. "My heart nearly stopped when you just slid in there. My carefully laid plans for a tranquil morning, utterly annihilated in one swift movement." He gestured dramatically with his hand, mimicking Oliver's bold maneuver. Oliver chuckled, leaning forward. "A necessary intervention, I assure you. Sometimes, Julian, the universe conspires to push us out of our comfort zones. And sometimes, the universe takes the form of a charming rogue with excellent taste in literature and a penchant for prime seating." He patted his leather-bound book, which still lay open on the table. Julian rolled his eyes, but it was an affectionate gesture. "Charming rogue, indeed. Though I have to admit something, Oliver." He paused, taking a moment to gather his thoughts. The vibrant café hum a pleasant backdrop to his confession. "When I walked in here, all I wanted was a quiet corner, a good book, and a peaceful latte. No distractions, no talking. Just calm." Oliver listened intently, his expression thoughtful, though a hint of that familiar mischief still danced in his eyes. "And now," Julian continued, gesturing between them and around the bustling café, "here I am, sitting at a table I almost didn't get, with a complete stranger who boldly stole my spot, and I haven't even opened my own book." He met Oliver's gaze, his smile broadening into something genuine and heartfelt. "And honestly, I wouldn't have it any other way." Oliver's grin softened, losing a bit of its cheeky edge and becoming genuinely warm. "Oh," he prompted, his voice a gentle invitation for Julian to elaborate. "Yes, oh," Julian affirmed, feeling a surprising rush of sincerity. "Because as much as I value my quiet time, this has been far more interesting. And much more fun. You're right, there was no other seat, and my coffee was getting cold, but really, I'm genuinely glad you took it. It led to a really great chat." He meant it. The conversation had been stimulating, the laughter refreshing, and Oliver's company a delightful surprise. He had arrived seeking solitude, and had found connection instead, a connection that felt surprisingly natural and easy. The playful tension they'd started with had melted entirely, leaving behind a comfortable rapport. Oliver's smile widened, a clear sign of his pleasure at Julian's admission. He reached across the table and tapped Julian's half-empty latte mug lightly. "So, the universe did conspire," he murmured, his eyes full of warmth. "And it seems the universe, in its infinite wisdom, Knew you needed a bit more than just a quiet coffee today. Julian chuckled, feeling a lightness in his chest. Perhaps it did. Perhaps it did. He took a final sip of his latte, now perfectly cooled, and looked around the cafe. It still buzzed with life, but it no longer felt overwhelming. It felt, instead, like a vibrant, welcoming space, made all the more enjoyable by the unexpected company across from him. The last vestiges of Julian's solitary morning dissolved completely as he and Oliver continued to chat, the cafe's vibrant energy now feeling like a harmonious backdrop rather than a chaotic din. Their conversation had covered everything from their favorite travel destinations to the most bizarre dreams they'd ever had. The ease between them was undeniable, a pleasant surprise for Julian, who usually found meeting new people a bit daunting. As their coffee cups sat mostly empty, a comfortable silence fell between them, punctuated by the clatter of dishes and the soft murmur of other voices. Julian glanced at his watch, a small pang of regret forming in his chest. Time had flown by. Well, Julian said, picking up his messenger bag from the floor, I suppose I should probably get going. Work calls, even after an unexpectedly delightful detour. He gave Oliver a genuine smile. Thanks for the company, Oliver, and for, not moving. Oliver's grin was back in full force, his green eyes sparkling. He reached for his own bag, which held the formidable leather-bound book. My pleasure, Julian. It's not every day one gets to both claim a strategic cafe position and engage in such stimulating banter. A true win-win, I'd say. He paused, then added, though I believe we only exchanged first names earlier, amidst the battle for real estate. For future reference, should our paths cross again, and I suspect they might, it's Oliver Reed. Julian chuckled, extending his hand across the table once more. Julian Hayes. And it was genuinely a pleasure, Oliver Reed. Their hands met in a firm, friendly shake. Indeed, Julian Hayes, Oliver replied, holding Julian's gaze. And seeing as the daily grind seems to be our mutual haven, I propose a standing agreement. He lowered his voice conspiratorially, as if sharing a top-secret plan. Should you ever find yourself wandering the cafe, latte in hand, desperately searching for a seat, and I happen to be occupying a table for two, consider it an open invitation. Julian laughed, a warm, genuine sound. Even if I was about to claim it myself, Oliver winked. Especially then. Think of it as fate's little nudge. Besides, now you know my name. You can't accuse a nameless rogue of table theft a second time. Fair point, Julian conceded, still smiling. And I'll extend the same courtesy. If I happen to snag a rare, empty table, and you're hovering, looking suspiciously at the chairs, consider yourself invited. A pact, Oliver declared, his eyes bright. Excellent. The daily grind will never be the same. He stood up, gathering his book and bag. It was truly a pleasure, Julian. May your designs be bold, and your coffee always perfectly frothed. And may your words flow freely, Oliver, Julian replied, standing as well. And your table-claiming skills remain unmatched. They walked towards the door together, the rich aroma of coffee and the cafe's lively chatter following them. As Julian pushed open the heavy glass door, letting in a gust of cool, fresh air, he glanced back at Oliver. Look out for me, then, Julian called out, a playful challenge in his voice. Oliver, already stepping out onto the street, turned and flashed that unforgettable grin. Always, Julian, always. And with a final wave, he melted into the bustling street, leaving Julian with a smile on his face and the lingering warmth of an unexpected and thoroughly enjoyable encounter. He realized that while he had come for a quiet coffee, he had left with something far more enriching. A new acquaintance, a good laugh, and the promise of future, playfully contentious cafe encounters. The daily grind had indeed provided more than just coffee today.